Good evening, students. A warm welcome to today's live. Today, we are going to discuss about Directive Principles of State Policy, a very important provision of our Constitution. I am not going to discuss the DPSPs because I'm sure you must have heard a lot about them. My focus today will be basically on the importance of DPSP, what is DPSP, its origin, why is it so important in India, and so on and so forth. So, we are going to discuss those things majorly. Let's begin with that now. Now, directive principles of state policy. Let me begin with giving you the meaning of the word directive principles of state policy. This session, I'm going to tell you the meaning, significance, characteristics of DPSP, and the amendments to directive principles. Amendment numbers more to do with, and I'm going to tell you how questions are usually asked on this. So, what are directive principles of state policy? How do we understand the directive principles of state policy? Let's look at this. Now, directive principles are basically instructions. Now, when I say instructions, given by whom to whom? Given by constitution to the state. Now, who is state? State is all those entities that come under Article 12, repeated under Article 36. Okay. To do what? State policy. Okay, these instructions are given by the constitution to the state to be used as basis for framing policies of the government and laws. All right. Now the question is, why should you do it? What is the end result of out of it? Because constitution wanted to establish a welfare state. Constitution wants to ensure that there is socialism. And most importantly, Constitution stands for distributive justice. What is distributive justice? Distributive justice is a combination of social and economic justice. So, a combination of social and economic justice is called as distributive justice because the constitution envisages a welfare state, socialism, distributive justice. It is telling the state how to achieve these by giving certain instructions which can be used in framing policies and laws. This is the meaning of directive principles of state policy. Now, the next thing that we have to discuss is about DPSPs, is about their origin. Remember, directive principles of state policy are similar to what was called as instruments of instruction that were given in, sorry, instruments of instruction that were given in the Government of India Act 1935 of instruction. Okay. And please remember, they are actually sourced from the Irish constitution, where they are called as directive principles of social policy, not a state policy. It is DPS's social policy. So, this is about the origins of DPSP. Now, the next thing that we have to discuss is about the characteristics of directive principles of state policy. What are the characteristics of DPSP? How do we understand the characteristics? See, Constitution itself gives us two important characteristics of DPSP, which also tell us their significance. Article 37 of Directive Principles of State Policy basically tells us that DPSPs are non justiciable in nature, meaning you cannot go to the court if directive principles are not implemented properly. Very specifically, it says not enforceable by court of law. The reasons why, the reason for not making it non justiciable, when you look at DPSPs technically address every necessity of human life, right from birth till death. You know, every necessity like malnourishment, education, employment, sickness, care in sickness, old age, disablement. So every aspect of human life, every necessity of human life is addressed. The first point is India is a very huge country and with a lot of population. This kind of huge population, implementing DPSPs as a rule, making them justiciable would be too taxing for a country which was under 200 years of impoverished British rule. So, one, practically it would not be possible to implement all of them at a time. And second, more practical reason is it should not be implemented at the same time because India has a lot of regional imbalances. These regional imbalances need tailor made solutions. For example, take a state like Kerala, it has the best literacy rate. Take a state like Tamil Nadu, it talks about the best primary healthcare system in India. But look at a state like Haryana, it has low literacy rate. So, in a state like Haryana, education should become focus. In a state like Kerala, something else should become a focus. So, to address the real needs, not the whatever is written on the paper, you don't have to do everything. What you need, pick and choose. Prioritize your needs. It's very important to make DPSPs non-justiciable. They are non-justiciable in nature is one. The second is obviously they are amendable in nature because amendments have been made but subject to basic structure. Third important point, they are positive obligations on the state. This is very, very important. They tell the state what it should do. Positive obligations on the state because they tell the state what it should do. Okay, they direct the state, they show the way to the state, they are directional in nature. Therefore, Article 37 says they are fundamental in the governance of the country because they tell the government what all it should do in terms of policies and laws, fundamental in the governance of India. Okay. And remember, they balance out fundamental rights because fundamental rights are negative obligations, directive principles or positive obligations. They are correlative to both fundamental rights and fundamental duties. How is this possible? For example, 39E and F talk about protecting children, giving them a situation where they can grow with dignity, protecting them from exploitation. In the Constitution, in fundamental rights, you have 21A, which talks about right to education, which guarantees a right to life with dignity. So dignity is taken care there. Again, you have 23 and 24, which 23 basically abolishes human trafficking. It prohibits human trafficking and forced labor. And 24 deals with child labor. It to a large extent restricts child labor. So these two provisions are related to the DPSP, which directs the state to protect children from all forms of exploitation. Like this, there are n number of examples where you find a correlation between fundamental rights and directive principles. It's another thing that there have been conflicts also. I'll take right to property as a separate class where I'll discuss about the conflict, and then we have fundamental duties. Fundamental duties, see, there is one directive principle which says that the state should protect the environment. Likewise, there is one fundamental duty which tells that we citizens should protect the environment. So they correlate. DPSPs are correlative to fundamental rights and fundamental duties. Now, these are the most important characteristics of directive principles. Now, let's discuss about the significance of directive principles of state policy. How, why, and how are they significant? What is the significance of directive principles of state policy? Very, very important. Please remember the most important reason why they are there is one, they establish a welfare state. Please remember the term welfare state is not mentioned in the constitution. Then what is a welfare state? Welfare state is one where the government focuses on making laws and policies that promote the overall well-being of the citizens of that country. In the constitution, it promotes policies, laws that actually the government makes policies, laws, enforces policies and laws for the overall well-being of citizens. In other words, in a welfare state, development is not just the responsibility of citizens, it is the responsibility of the state. The state should facilitate development, um, uh, it should provide resources, it should provide opportunities for development. Now, whether I develop or not, that's another story. But do I have an opportunity or not? The Constitution says state should facilitate opportunity. So, welfare state is not possible without implementation of DPSPs. First reason why it is important. Now, the second reason why DPSPs are important is they are a yardstick to measure the performance of government. This is very, very important. Measure the performance of government. Why do I consider it as a yardstick to measure the performance of government? What do you mean by this? If a government is re-elected, if a government is coming back to power again after elections, 90% of the cases it is because of the schemes and policies that it has implemented. Okay, unless these schemes or policies are implemented, government will not come back to power, be it in the center or in the state. There have been several game changing schemes and policies by governments, both at the central level and the state level, which brought government with the same party back to power. Okay, so whether you're performing properly or not will be measured on the basis of how many DPSPs are you implementing. In layman terms, what schemes are you implementing? How much are they benefiting the general public? But this off late has also become a major criticism because, see, DPSPs envisaged a welfare state, and a welfare state should be sustainable. But freebies, we call them as freebies. I'm sure you all understand where money is given in most of the schemes. Freebies in everything is not sustainable. Over a period of time, too many freebies, too many subsidies will impact the economy. Somewhere the human resources will become complacent and laid back. So that is a major threat of implementing DPSPs. Nonetheless, the governments are going all out to implement DPSPs because it directly impacts the vote bank. Okay, so the criticism is focus should be on welfare measures, not on populist measures. What is the difference? Welfare measures is where you have a long term vision, where you know that every paisa that you're investing today will reap benefits and it will be sustainable. But populist is what the people demand. You're not looking at sustainability, you're not looking at the long term benefit. You're just doing it because there is a popular demand and it can transform into vote bank. Okay, so this is the second point. This third important reason why DPSPs are significant is Constitution itself is declaring them as fundamental in the governance of the country. Very, very important. They are basic basis to the governance of the country. Without a DPSPs, the governance would be difficult because they are directional in nature. Governance of the country. Constitution itself is declaring it. Okay, the four, it manages, it balances fundamental rights. Why am I saying this? Because fundamental rights focus more on individuals, whereas DPSPs are more towards focus DPSPs, their focus is more towards not individuals but the larger good community. They are more community oriented in comparison with the fundamental rights that are more individual centric. Okay. Five, very, very important to achieve. In fact, in directive principles, you have under Article 38, very clearly it says the government should strive to establish a socialistic pattern. You should have a socialistic pattern of society. So basically, socialism, the most important tool envisaged in the constitution to achieve socialism is DPSP. Without socialism, you cannot, without DPSP, you cannot promote socialism. Socialism, distributive justice are possible in India only because of directive principles of state policy. So, apart these are the most important reasons or significance of DPSP. Apart from this, please remember they also correlate with the right to development, which is envisaged under right to development. And this is given under un- United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So in UNDHR, United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, you have 30 rights. One of the right correlates with this, that is right to development. This is the reason why DPSPs are extremely important. You have to read every directive principle. I did not want to take it in this session because it is largely factual. But what I would like to tell you is the questions that would be asked. One is on the provisions directly, so you have to know by heart what 38 says, 39 says. 39 has A, B, C, D, E, F clauses. You have to know them also. 39A, capital A. Basically, remember, DPSPs had four amendments till date. Till date, we had four amendments to directive principles. The first amendment was the 42nd constitutional amendment, followed by the 44th constitutional amendment. Whenever you're reading TPSPs, please ensure that you make a separate note of all this. This is very important. 86th constitutional amendment, and finally we had the 97th constitutional amendment that inserted directive to establish, directing the state to promote and facilitate establishment of cooperatives. Now, 42nd Amendment, 44th, 86, 97, you should exactly know what all was added. I'll give you a small tip. Remember, if you have 39A, this was there in the Constitution when it commenced, it was not added. But 39, capital A, capital letter indicates that it was added later. Okay, likewise, we have 43A. So, wherever you have these A's and B's in the DPSP, the capital letters, you have to understand that these were included later in directive principles. They were not originally there. So, directive principles happen to be one of the most important provisions of the Constitution. I would say, after fundamental rights, the most important provisions. You have to know each provision in detail. There will be small things like right to work. Right to work is mentioned under DPSP. Many a times the question was, which of the following is not a fundamental right in the Constitution? Right to work is not mentioned as a fundamental right. It is mentioned as a directive principle. In fact, you will be surprised. In the Constituent Assembly debates, there was a very big discussion. The discussion was about justiciable and non-justiciable rights. It was proposed that the Constitution should provide for both justiciable rights and non-justiciable rights. The justiciable rights were given under fundamental rights, whereas the non justiciable rights are placed under DPSP. So, DPSPs are otherwise also considered as non justiciable rights because through these directives, there are benefits being given to various sections of society. So, DPSPs can also be considered as non justiciable rights given under the Constitution. In fact, they were proposed as non-justiciable rights in Constituent Assembly. So this is about directive principles of state policy. A very quick overview of DPSP. Tomorrow's session, I'll meet with a new topic. Thank you so much. Bye bye.